Hello.
Our story begins in deep-seated thought. Ahsoka was mustering the strength to face what she had considered one of the great failures of her life. Being removed from the Jedi Order challenged everything she knew about herself. She was honestly in shambles, just a step away from a full-blown mental breakdown. Ahsoka had handled herself well, with bravery and resilience when facing her master on the steps of the temple, but she couldn't help but fall apart now. It was easier when no one was watching, and now, completely isolated from everything she had ever known, she had to confront everything. Chief among the thoughts that rampaged through her mind were questions of why Barriss had done what she did. Her friend was someone she thought so highly of, someone who had care and instruction and understanding and compassion. Barriss never seemed capable of something so vengeful. The words she shared on the stand inside the Republic courtroom ran through Ahsoka's head at this moment. It wasn't an attack against the people of the galaxy or the poor souls who lost their lives inside the hangar bay. It was a message to the Jedi Council that they had long overstayed their welcome. The galaxy was changing and evolving. They needed to catch up or forever be left behind. In their absence, people were suffering, and Barriss had seen it with her master firsthand. There was nothing righteous in teaching humility and courtesy if the highest chamber inside the Order couldn't maintain those same virtues. Perhaps Ahsoka reacted too negatively towards her friend. The situation had drastically evolved since then anyways, so she couldn't totally be upset at Barriss anymore. At the moment, her life was in jeopardy, and even though Anakin was close to Palpatine, Tarkin was unrelenting. Now that she wasn't moments away from being cast off to the electric chair or some other tool used to take life, she could think about the message in all of this. She could see similar parallels in this incident, with various moments of frustration thrown at her master in the earlier parts of the war. The conflict was hard on all of them, but the Jedi did not fully recognize that their youngest were the most susceptible towards pulls to the dark side, mostly with those who lost their instructors like former Separatist assassin Asajj Ventress. Jedi would turn towards darkness and rely on his gifts for power and comfort. Ahsoka knew outright that she did not want that power. That was never her long-term goal. However, she could not ignore what she was thinking at this specific moment. The head of the Jedi Order was completely detrimental to the survival of the sect. She could not return as a knight and hope to make some radical changes inside their chambers, but perhaps she could utilize tools that hadn't been taken advantage of. Ahsoka began her trek towards the lower levels of Coruscant, as she started to consider some other facets of life that would be radically changed without Jedi clearance. Among her varying thoughts, she considered her friends, the clones, the war itself, and everything that came with it. The change in her own life wouldn't set similar actions into motion. She was a minor piece on a massive board, and she knew that. Though there was a conclusion she kept running to. These internal discussions found home with something she hadn't yet considered, and something that her dear friend Barriss may have been onto. The causation of all of her problems on a micro scale originated from the fallacies of the High Council. This was youthful misunderstanding, perpetuated at its highest level. But in Ahsoka's mind, it was the logical conclusion to come to. In the following days, Ahsoka would make a move that would shock the galaxy, Palpatine, and the Jedi Order. Using the same nanobots Barriss used to bomb the Jedi Temple hangar bay, Ahsoka used a variety of hidden access points inside the temple itself to lay explosives across the High Council tower. Some of them were positioned at the base, with a couple others cemented around the structure and the actual office itself. Ahsoka did this at night to avoid detection, while also wearing all black to do it. The explosives were given a time to detonate, so that no one would be hurt when the explosions came. Unlike Barriss, Ahsoka went to extreme lengths to make sure that only the acting body of the High Council felt the heat of this explosion. They were the only group in the entire Order deserving of this fate, and she wanted to ensure they felt it. She didn't know if the weight of the tower falling would do damage internally, so she picked a time that she knew all students were in session, so that they wouldn't be near the garden or in the halls at that given time. It was the best way to reduce potential casualties, and then Ahsoka found her temporary home and waited. When the morning came, the Jedi High Council assembled. Another amazing day of Jedi bureaucracy. The first to enter were Masters Windu, Ali, and Plo. Following them were some elders, Master Ancesis and Mundi. Shaak Ti graced the council chambers from Kamino, and Saesee Tiin walked with Obi-Wan, Eeth Koth, and Coleman Kaj into the chambers. The last to enter the chambers was Master Yoda. who had been inside of a prolonged meditation due to an intense vision. He wasn't sure how to feel about it, but he was going to mention it to his peers in passing. First order of business, though, was an unfinished talking point from a couple days before. Following Ahsoka's departure and Anakin's subsequent following of her, the Masters of the Council spoke momentarily about giving Skywalker another student. Obi-Wan surprisingly discouraged this idea, believing it could cause a rupture in trust, as if there wasn't already one present. Kenobi felt that rushing another student on the Skywalker could make him feel that the Council was trying to forget about their mistake. Despite this suggestion, the collective council put it to a vote, and they decided that even though Ahsoka's situation wasn't favorable, they were going to attempt to give Anakin another student. Unlike Yoda's previous gift, they wouldn't spring a student on him. They would instead question if he was willing to speak about these terms. So, as the clock ticked closer towards the explosion, Anakin entered the council chambers. The bombing was given an extra brief period of a couple minutes, so that stragglers could get to class, or if any of the counselors were late, then they wouldn't avoid their death date. As the doors opened to the council chambers, Ahsoka woke up. A wave of immense regret filled her body. She only at this moment realized what her actions would mean for Obi-Wan and Plo Koon, not to mention some of the others with more valiant stances. Not all of them were worthy of dying. That wasn't fair or the right decision. Ahsoka stood up from her perch and tapped on her handheld device to disarm the weapons, but they wouldn't disarm. She lost her breath just coming to the realization, and she paused before looking up at the towers of the Jedi Temple, isolated above the cityscape below it. Such a beautiful and complex structure, containing thousands of years of Jedi history. Anakin, on the other hand, bowed before the Jedi Council, asking why they had summoned him. He searched Obi-Wan's face for a hint of purpose here, and Yoda spoke up before Anakin could read Obi-Wan. The Grand Master wanted to formally again apologize for the situation with Ahsoka Tano. Skywalker hadn't truly recovered from that incident, and probably wouldn't ever, but bringing it up was only reopening the wound further. He held his breath, trying to avoid an outburst that would further isolate him from those he stood before. Yoda finished speaking, and the bombs ticked closer towards their detonation. Anakin humbly rejected their suggestion, thanking them each individually as peacefully as he could. The last thing he wanted was to cause a scene, but that was out of his control. Yoda prodded some more, asking another question, but Anakin's foot had already turned towards the exit. He swayed, back towards where he was standing inside. He told them that he just didn't have the energy. His focus needed to be on himself and his troopers. These were his men to take care of, and he was doing what best he could to maintain his own sense of control. The Jedi watched him with curiosity, but he bowed and started for the doors. When he reached them, he stopped and turned. He didn't mean to come off as ungrateful, and as he went to say thank you to the council for at least considering his mental health, the room detonated into an array of fire. A series of explosions climbed up the side of the tower afterwards, and the entire structure flung to pieces before crashing down on the center of the temple. There was a reason the temple had stood for so long, so luckily no one else was immediately hurt, but there was a ton of rattled Jedi inside the temple, many of which who had never seen active combat before the previous bombing. When they realized what it was, terror engulfed the Order once more, as Republic media spread across the city to cover the incident. Ahsoka, as a result, vanished into the street level, and rushed through open vendors and crowds to keep her mind preoccupied, but the sight of her actions was burned into her head. Never would she be able to escape her actions. Palpatine sat in his office, in shock, and even some disappointment. There would be no satisfaction in destroying the Jedi now. He at least wanted to have the enjoyment of knowing that the High Council saw the betrayal before it killed them, but no longer. He watched the media as the Senate shut down for a day, and the Coruscant Guard activated every aspect of their command to defend the capital from any other attacks. The bombing of the hangar bay had done considerable damage to the reputation of the Order. Now it seemed that the people couldn't blame the Jedi for everything. So frequently had the media, public, and government pass blame off onto those who tried to help, that now it felt weird for most citizens to feel bad for the Jedi. There were several images of younglings with terrified expressions running out of the bombed temple for the second time. They had survived 2 attacks. How many more could they escape unscathed? Though something that crossed Palpatine's mind was a lack of communication from his future apprentice. He had only truly considered the ramifications this might have on Order 66. People might feel too much sympathy for the Jedi, thus making him a villain for betraying them with the clones or Order 66. There were too many potential political ramifications, but now he feared for Anakin's life. He would be revealed to be one of the 12 individuals killed. With Shaak Ti not being present, she was the only survivor of the Jedi Council. She was being rushed back to Coruscant as Palpatine waited to make his next political play. He did not know who did this, but he did know that he would kill them, just like he would kill every single Jedi. They had potentially disrupted his plans indefinitely. To ensure it wasn't Barriss Offee, a dose of poison would be put in her food, and the clones who protected her cell would have their tongues cut out if they reported her death. But even though this would deal with one culprit, there was another out there somewhere with the capability to do this large of damage to the Jedi Order. He first contacted Dooku, but the answer wasn't all that surprising. Of course Tyrannus wouldn't do that. He was too loyal to mess with Palpatine's plans. For now, the Sith Lord had to wait. Ahsoka in the underworld sat in silence. She was on a bench, waiting for the day to come to an end, so she could pretend it was all a bad dream. But on the news, she could see the incident replay over and again from various angles from cameras across the city. The same body count had been reported, but the media was currently waiting for an official name list to come out, something that Jocasta knew would selectively avoid releasing. Ahsoka's mind just had to dwell on her actions. She felt so assertive in them, and now all she felt was contrite. She kept telling herself that it was for the better of the Order, but that couldn't be. What about her master, Anakin? She had left him because she needed to find her own path, and as a result her path brought down the only other most important Jedi in his life? It didn't make sense. Well, Ahsoka's guilt would soon be heightened when Master Shaak Ti informed the galaxy in a public message that the Jedi would maintain their position on battlefronts across the galaxy. The loss of 12 brothers and sisters was as heartbreaking as it was eye-opening. Whoever had done this hurt the Jedi deeply, but it did not change their resolve to defending the galaxy. The lone counselor left it at that, and chills rolled off Ahsoka's body. She had damned an innocent to that bombing. Who it could be, she was left to imagine. Somewhere inside of her, she feared potentially that her master had been killed, but she pushed those thoughts from her mind and tried to find somewhere else to think. That grew more impossible as the night and eventually days passed along. When there weren't tears to be spared, she was on the cusp of another breakdown. Her heart had been hurt more than it ever was when she was betrayed and nearly put to death. Those were terms she could live with because that's what she was taught to embrace as a Jedi. Selflessness. Two completely paths in life had just conflicted at this junction, the one of a Jedi and the one of solitude. The Jedi Order was now in a bind. Its most senior survivors, the last counselor Shaak Ti, the archivist Jocasta Nu, and the battle master Sindralik, were forced to come to a decision. They were the highest ranked Jedi left. They had no guidance, and they were all forced to choose what would become of the Jedi. Initially, as Shaak Ti had recently reported, they believed maintaining a position in the conflict was worth their time, but that opinion started to shift rapidly. Shaak Ti called for an emergency council to be erected, which would see new faces with hierarchical positions inside the Order rise to this occasion. Among them were the 3 previously mentioned Jedi and former counselor Tera Sinube. This emergency council was something a part of the Jedi Code, giving them a chance to survive in case such a tragedy, like the council bombing, occurred. Their position, to stand by the Republic, hadn't served them well, and many Jedi were fearful that these 2 attacks were just a beginning. Tano and Offee were no longer of a concern in any of this, because these attacks could not be orchestrated by 2 Padawans. No one present knew about Barriss's death inside of prison anyways. The Jedi were in doldrums, without any chance of potentially saving themselves. A choice needed to be made if the Order was to survive. Shaak Ti proposed that the Jedi Order begin quietly removing itself from the war altogether. This was an outrageous position, but she referenced points made by Barriss. If there were members of the Order that believed the Jedi Council had neglected the Order itself in the pursuit of war, then the best means to prevent an all-out schism was to avoid the war. It wasn't what anyone preferred, but the political ramifications of the temple bombing set them back to pre-Old Republic era relations with the government. The council bombing had them without leadership. What would come next? Clearly there were tensions arising from within the Order, and truthfully, even though she wasn't here prior to the bombing, Shaak Ti believed this came from within the Order. The collective turned their attention to the eldest members present, and looked for an answer. Jocasta Nu and Terra Sanube remained still and silent. Shaak Ti was among the youngest in this coalition, and she cut through the quietness and expressed readily that she was acting to save the Order. Whether they agreed with the decision to abandon Coruscant or not, she did not care. This was for their survival, this was for their Order. It was no secret that they had been scapegoating themselves for the perfection of an idealistic Republic society that no longer stood. She revealed inner workings of the Council and their growing distrust of Palpatine's administration. Shaak Ti, only because of these two back-to-back assaults on the Order, came to the rational conclusion that once the war was over, Palpatine would challenge the Jedi Order. If he couldn't control it like he did every other facet of the Republic, minus the banking clans, then he would force that power into his hands or destroy it. That was the bureaucracy of the Republic, and the fate of the Jedi Order. They needed to act now, or forever become buried under chicanery. For all sides of this internal Coruscant-based conflict, there was a brief period of stagnation. Many drafts of disunion between the Republic and Jedi were created, though much of the tone in these writings were quite inveighing. Master Shaak Ti, who took control over the quiet removal from the temple, discontinued their attempts at properly separating from the Republic. It was obvious how things were going to go if they tried to reasonably leave. It'd be twisted into some sort of political abuse, and another external review followed by what could best be described as Order-wide house arrest could potentially be proposed for the Order. None of it was worth their time, and Shaak Ti instead focused on their escape. The truth about this expedition, as the Jedi called it, was that most of the Order would not learn about it. In true Council fashion, Shaak Ti preferred to keep things quiet. So, as a few Jedi showed signs of rebellious traits, such as a Pa-Un Temple Guard, so many were left in the dark. It became a top priority of the Reserve Council to maintain secrecy until the entire Order was in safety. Due to the shabbiness of former temples and outposts, the Jedi were dividing up their entire Order into as small of groups as possible, starting with younglings first. The title Spiritual Expedition was utilized to cover their actual intentions of completely abandoning Coruscant. For the time being, this would be the removal of the Jedi from the core. They may return someday, but for now, their only focus was protecting themselves. Darth Sidious, who was also completely unaware of this, got into basic contact with a couple of Jedi Knights inside the Jedi Order. The most intrigued by his offers was the future Grand Inquisitor. Neither of them knew about these preparations or plans, and slowly, after being influenced by Barris's speech at the court hearing, the Temple Guard found resolution with the Sith, and Sidious's plans for the galaxy and the Jedi. Violam, the Temple Guard, had similar pulls towards political idealism as Dooku, but he lacked the political savviness that made Tyrannus such a favorable pull for the Sith Lord. Ahsoka, on the other hand, was in a bit of trouble. The men of the Coruscant Guard had apprehended her after she beat the Christ out of somebody. Now, in her defense, the guy was a lowlife with aspirations to aid a sex trafficking ring in the lower levels of Coruscant. Ahsoka was able to use the evidence she found to help Commander Thorn and the Coruscant Guard with finding said traffickers and disemboweling them, because they deserved nothing less. Ahsoka was in prison while they were doing this, so she had to wait for a couple days. Now, by prison, this was more or less the county jail. It wasn't like a real-deal maximum security prison. These clones trusted her, hence why they left her in the county jail, and when they returned, she suggested something rambunctious. Ahsoka had recovered, in a way, from her little bombing. She still had no clue that Anakin had been killed, but she was pushed into a position where she only felt better about herself by enacting vengeful acts against deserving people. In her mind, she was taking the Jedi path to its limits. She didn't live by the code, per se, but she also didn't mercilessly kill or hurt people. She targeted bad people who deserved to be treated like bad people. The clones didn't mind this, even though this type of vigilantism wasn't necessarily permitted by the clone core. They heard about her from Rex's boys, so they trusted her. There was a shared camaraderie here, though Thorn's relatively small squad did not know of Anakin's passing either, because of their current deployment period. Despite being a commander, Thorn worked with a small unit on important operations in the lower levels. The rotary cannon may have been a bit overkill, but as he called it, the hammer, it did its job. The men of Thorn's unit were treated as an elite squad, and they frequently dealt with the worst of the worst in the lower levels, unless otherwise needed for political diplomatic missions. Though Ahsoka had a proposition, to which the clones listened to. She was intent on ruining the Separatists. She explained her plan, and while it was slightly outside the confines of their command, Thorn loved the idea so much, and the potential effects it could have, that he couldn't say no. Over the coming few weeks, there'd be some slight changes. Ahsoka, for example, was given transport to Ilum, thanks to a clone lending her a shuttle, so that she can construct herself 2 new lightsabers. Inexplicably, they would be blue. She still did not know of her master's fate, but she did know that what she did to the Council had benefited the Order. She didn't know to what extent, but it had become clear that the Jedi made some internal policy changes. To run a cover, Jocasta Nu was confronting the Senate, in the middle of their so important war, so they didn't levy another external review on the Order. It wouldn't matter in the slightest, it was just for the purpose of distraction. More taxpayer credits for nothing that changed anything. Ahsoka and Thorn, on the other hand, were moved out towards another core world. Everything was going perfectly until another assassination happened. This move was made by Sindralik, the Battlemaster, and it completely blindsided everyone, even Jocasta Nu. See, the Jedi had been actively removing themselves from the galaxy. Most of their members were in the Outer Rim. Knights and Masters were ordered to disengage from their battlefront positions and go to one of several locations closest to them. This was not a total removal from humanitarian work, more or less the removal from active battlefronts and Republic aid. Well, the future Grand Inquisitor was learning more about the plans to destroy the complacent Jedi from Sidious, when eventually he was told that he was being shipped off of world. He complied as per his orders, and he learned the truth. Violum used this as a teaching moment, one in which he realized the salvation of their order and the flaws of his own choices. So, he zipped back to Coruscant, informed his new master that there was a Jedi plot, but he would need to unveil it in the following session. Grand Inquisitor did tell Sidious the truth. He told him everything he needed to know about the Jedi plan, and then, as the old Sith legend of Sidious the Unlucky goes, he was murdered by a Jedi in plain daylight. Sindralik greeted the Sith Lord inside the Senate, shook his hand, then shoved his lightsaber through his back the second he walked past him. The Senate commandos present were also unlucky, but they wouldn't die, just be injured. Grand Inquisitor betrayed Palpatine because his allegiances hadn't fully been switched, and now that he saw who the Jedi really were, he was able to save the galaxy from elongated conflict. The rest of the Jedi, all of which being inside the Senate building, escaped into the atmosphere and vanished from Coruscant before they could ever be stopped. This sent shockwaves through the galaxy and the Republic, but Dooku acted quickly, something that would lead to an unceremonious reunion between 2 old friends. Thorn and the boys of his squad had agreed to terms with Ahsoka that would carry out a mission in secrecy. They were in hyperspace when they received news of Palpatine's assassination at the hands of the Jedi. Truthfully, the clones with Ahsoka became a little hesitant, but Thorn reminded them who they were working with. This did hurt Ahsoka a little bit, because even though she pushed her emotions down by actively doing good to help others, she knew what no one else did. She was probably the cause of this assassination, and she was also very aware that when those feelings resurfaced after pushing them down for however long, she would be in a world of pain. It didn't matter at the moment though. They landed on Neimoidia and began their mission. A bunch of shock troopers and a former Jedi were an odd sight to see, so that's why they remained unseen. The floating platforms of the Neimoidian capital were perfect for hiding under the city. There were several layers of tunnels, basically an underground network of mazes that they utilized. It kept them away from the battle droid-filled streets. The mission they were completing was a simple one. Ahsoka, in all of her meandering prior to and after the Council bombing, thought of the radicalization Padme had given her. The lessons of political movements, interest rates, alignments, alliances, and so forth were the work of the corporations profiting off of the war. Ahsoka then realized that to end the war, she needed to destroy the corporate branch of these executives, and because they all worked together, even in public, it would be easy to target a joint board meeting. That's what they were doing here on Neimoidia. Even though it wasn't within Ahsoka's intel, it was a meeting that Dooku called together. Every month, these major talking heads would go to various planets, like Skako Minor, Sereno, Utapau, Mustafar, Geonosis, and so forth. Neimoidia had been under siege, but with the death of Plo Koon, the Republic pulled back. This gave the Separatists a chance to bolster the defenses, and bring the Separatist leaders in to discuss potential outcomes for the war. Yet there was also a change of plans, because Palpatine's recent death changed everything. Another reinforced garrison came in the form of General Grievous. So as Ahsoka and the clone squad ascended the Trade Federation HQ, she ran into Grievous. They were here for the exact same thing, but they happened to cross paths before ever getting to the boardroom. Thorn luckily divided the squad up upon seeing Grievous, and the rest of them stuck by her side. Instantly a duel commenced. Even though she hadn't been using her lightsabers, she was just as skillful as she had been at their last encounter. Ahsoka's determination to avoid the dark side kept her fully balanced within herself. Their sabers clashed away as clones fired at the droid general. Grievous was amused to see her here, and had no knowledge or care about her predicament with the Jedi. She was a Jedi in his eyes, through and through, and she'd pay for it. Despite having superior numbers, Thorn's men were attacked by Grievous's Magna Guard unit, forcing the hammer to do overtime while firing at the staffed droids. Ahsoka ducked and avoided Grievous's strikes, using her blue sabers to defend everything he threw at her. She played defensively in this assault, as above them, where the boardroom was, explosions could be heard. The shock troopers slaughtered the Separatist Council and destroyed the security system and the droid guards present. Thorn and his boys did a fighting retreat, as they did everything they could to take down the attacking Magna Guards. Ahsoka weaved away from Grievous and then used the Force to launch him across the hall. Thorn turned his attention to her and fired at the droid general. As he did, he was stabbed with one of the Magna Guard staffs, and as he turned his rotator cannon into the droid's stomach, he shredded the entire thing before kicking it down. He then turned back towards Grievous. The droid general started crawling towards him and the other clones, and Ahsoka reached her hands out to stop Grievous with the Force. She started pulling him towards him. His claws stabbed into the ground and planted him securely, not giving her a chance to remove him or stop him. As Thorn turned his cannon at Grievous, he used Ahsoka's pull on the Force against her, releasing his claws and leaping into the air and igniting his sabers. Since she was pulling Grievous towards herself to keep the clone safe, this gave Grievous the perfect vantage point. Ahsoka threw her sabers into her face and was knocked down immediately, but Thorn was right behind Grievous, pumping the cyborg's back full of blaster bolts. Grievous swung around, slashing the front of Thorn's helmet, and he dropped to the ground, and Ahsoka, with one final strike, threw her sabers into his back, killing him instantly. She rushed to Thorn's side, feeling like a Jedi commander all over again, and he laughed a big belly chuckle. The cut Grievous gave him opened up his helmet, revealing his eye, but not hurting him in the slightest. Ahsoka grinned and pulled him off the ground as the other shock troopers, by this point, having dealt with the rest of Grievous's Magna Guard squad, joined up. Before they left, Ahsoka launched Grievous's body out of the tower and towards the surface of the planet, so that he could not be reconstructed, before they made their quick escape. The death of the Separatist Council came with a massive financial blow to Republic markets, because many of these people played double-sided games. They took from the Separatists and the Republic as a neutral entity, while fighting with Dooku's rebellion. Now they were all dead for their scheming. On top of that, Palpatine and Grievous were gone too, leaving Tyrannus with the decision he planned on making in this scenario. He, with the full power of the droid military, would take the galaxy for himself. As Ahsoka and Thorn's boys returned from Neimoidia, they found the capital engulfed in chaos. Not because of a battle of Coruscant, but because of the market crash and Palpatine's death, which didn't help the market stay afloat anyways. As much as Ahsoka would like to stay with Thorn's squad and they with her, it wasn't safe. The Jedi were being branded as terrorists, and they were to be shot on sight. Thorn did everything he could for Ahsoka and got her a transport off-world to Ferrix, which was considerably better than staying on Coruscant at the time. Though news would finally reach her, after Ahsoka's biggest accomplishment was her biggest failure. Just as she was entering her transport to Ferrix, Senator Amidala saw her by happenstance. They met in private before the vessel departed, and it was revealed to Ahsoka that Anakin had been killed in the attack on the temple. It shattered Ahsoka's heart. Padme had been struggling with it considerably, but she was alright. C-3PO and R2-D2 kept her mostly sane throughout this time of grief. Seeing Ahsoka warmed her heart, and she encouraged Ahsoka to stay out on Ferrix until the war came to an end. Republic troops would not enter that territory unless the Separatists did, but that seemed unlikely. Ahsoka tried to say something about her actions, but she couldn't stomach it. Plus, her ship was about to leave, so Padme sent her away with a big hug and told her to take care of herself. The shame Ahsoka felt knowing she had killed her bigger brother and Padme's best friend was heart-wrenching. As an added effect, Padme would never be pregnant from that previous relationship. When Ahsoka entered the vessel, her vision became dizzy, she was nauseous, and even struggled to breathe. All at once, every emotion she had neglected for what felt like months resurfaced and wreaked havoc across her soul. Ahsoka sobbed in silence and held herself in knowing what she had done to Anakin. She had hoped he had been alright since Obi-Wan's passing, but there was, at the very least, some sense of comfort in knowing that her master did not need to suffer through losing Obi-Wan and herself at the same time. However, that didn't really elicit a lot of relief to her either. The guilt she had was immeasurable, and by the time she reached Ferrix, she hadn't eaten and she was wobbly on her feet. Luckily, there was a woman there who saw her struggling to find her balance, and took her in. Marva Karasi Andor was her name. She was a daughter of Ferrix, someone who could help Ahsoka find a fresh start. The Jedi weapons were mildly concerning for Marva, but she just told Ahsoka to keep them hidden, as she helped the young, former Jedi find her feet in the grief she suffered. As Ahsoka would also come to learn, it was okay to cry with Marva. She was like home, and that was something Ahsoka didn't truly realize she needed. Outside of Ahsoka's newfound home on Ferrix, there were some troubles for the Republic. Dooku was days away from launching the full might of the Separatist military against the Republic, and then his Senate, without knowledge of his intentions, blindsided him. See, the whole market crashing was a part of a much larger problem. A few months earlier, before any of the bombings, the Republic deregulated the banks. Then, the peace treaty with Metamorpheus was shattered, forcing the CIS and Republic to request additional troops. The Republic was already on the brink of bankruptcy to fund the war, and the 25% interest rates were already enough to rip the Galactic Reserve into shreds. So, when you include the death of every major corporate head in the market, and the market crashes, so does everything else. Palpatine's death as a pro-business chancellor also created a massive influx of that crash, because he was in alignment with the Techno-Union, Trade Federation, and so forth. Though the major dagger was the banking clans. This was something Sidious planned on dealing with in the next couple of months, but he never got around to doing it due to dying. He planned to take control over the banks and erase all the Republic debt, but because that didn't happen and the Republic was entering an economic depression, the inexperienced banking clans council that replaced the old one pressed the Republic. So how does this impact Dooku, you might ask? Well, the Separatist Senate was just a little kinder than the Republic one. Seeing the total and complete economic turmoil of the Republic, they were prepared to emerge as the dominant power in the galaxy. Grievous' death was even more incentive to end the war and focus on the trade in the galaxy. The neutral systems were reeling after Satine's execution on Mandalore, and the galactic political environment needed a strong government. The Confederacy saw this as their chance to rise economically, and they figuratively and literally cock-blocked Dooku from massacring every Republic system. There was no need for the continuation of conflict, because the CIS was everything the Republic could never be. They were the compassionate ones. Tyrannus challenged this and almost faced complete and total impeachment for interference in what the CIS Senate called Galactic Governmental Reunification, or GGR. The GGR plans, stated by the Separatists, would completely overhaul almost all trade, production, communication, and banking into Separatist jurisdiction. Seeing that the banking clans were waiting for the Republic to pay them back for having loaned them so much money, they weren't in a position to challenge the CIS, so that's what they did. Dooku couldn't really do anything, and while he could wage war, he preferred to remain in power without completely destroying the galaxy and his reputation, and thus, the Republic would slip under the grip of a powerful and united Confederacy. Clearly it was not Dooku's first choice, but he would be reminded of why he joined the Sith to begin with. The Republic was no longer the ruling party in the galaxy, and while he wouldn't ever see it, the Confederacy, following the long and drawn-out peace treaty, would become the ruling government. They would also humanely provide amnesty for the clones, because it was the right thing to do. Down the line there would be rebellions and revolutions, but this was just spiteful Republic citizens. It had absolutely nothing to do with the structure of the Confederacy. Ahsoka, on the other hand, struggled for years with the killing she did. While it did result in a purer galaxy to a degree, she frequently wondered what would have been if she didn't kill her master. The final conversation on the steps of the temple would haunt her for most of her life, though Marva Karasi Andor would provide Ahsoka with a pathway out of such detrimental feelings. The daughters of Ferrix would accept Ahsoka as one of their own. She would, through the years, meet with Rex, the boys of the 501st, and of course Thorn and some of their surviving squad members. All of these interactions were quite beautiful, though Ahsoka's time with the daughters of Ferrix revealed the reality that faced the Jedi. The Order, after dealing with Palpatine, split up. It was a unified sect, but they spread throughout the Outer Rim thinly. The younglings and Padawans were more across the Mid-Rim territories, with Knights, Masters, Temple Guards, and the new Council working out of the Outer Rim. They protected people, they saved millions of slaves, and once the Confederacy became the dominant power in the galaxy, they were joined by battle droids and clones in their quests to bring freedom to everyone. The Jedi never became a political body again, but the CIS did respect them a whole lot more than the Republic ever did after the High Republic ended. And honestly, for Ahsoka, the one who followed in the steps of Barriss Offee, that was perhaps the most rewarding thing ever. She, on Ferrix, as a daughter of Ferrix, would find herself a spouse eventually, and become a force healer for those who needed her gifts. It was just another way for Ahsoka to remain happy. She was a functional member of their society, someone who brought people joy and assisted with justice. But somehow, at the end of all of it, Ahsoka was someone who, through one minor domino effect, changed the galaxy for good. And that, my friends, is our story. It might actually be a wholesome PP story, I'm not sure. On a scale of 1 to PP, how wholesome do you think the story is? I don't know, I think it's like maybe a 7. So, special thanks to the patrons, let's talk about this story. I'm not gonna lie, this one might be one of my favorite ways I've dealt with the big three. Sidious' assassination, insane. Anakin's completely removed, no offense, but that was fun not having him at all involved in the story. Dooku, he gets to be free, and Grievous gets into a fight with Ahsoka. I really wanted there to be a lot of mixed tension here. Obviously the tension with Anakin potentially dying in the council chambers was something I wanted to flirt with. I almost went the other way, I was kind of 50-50 on it, but I felt like the story would be more unique if he was completely removed from the equation and killed, and then you have to live with when Ahsoka finds out about that. And she already has the grief of doing it, that the grief of learning about killing her master just becomes overwhelming in the end. Ahsoka matching up with Thorn, that was a lot of fun to do. As for Ahsoka's full journey here, I think her destroying the council chambers inversely has the most positive effect on the galaxy. This might be one of the better scenarios. It was really fun doing the little political segment at the end there. I've been doing a lot of this Star Wars C-SPAN with you guys lately, but you guys love it, so I mean, I love it too, so it's a lot of fun. But it was really fun to do this like whole manipulation of how the Separatists could literally claim the galaxy if the Republic sunk into depression or recession, and that's what they really do. And I love the idea of them threatening Dooku with impeachment, just being like, hey, you're not allowed to do that. If you do that, you're done for. Even though he could probably kill them all, I think Dooku, realistically, without Palpatine in his ear, would actually see the way. He'd be like, oh, actually, I joined for this exact reason. Why am I going to do this? So, anyways, hope you all enjoyed. This was a fun story. I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.